Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a pretty heavy topic, the killing fields of Cambodia.
Yeah, a really dark chapter.
We've got a ton of research articles, firsthand accounts ready to go, and our goal, I think, with this one is to not just understand what happened, but, why
Yeah.
and what it means for us now.
Absolutely.
So before we get into it, make sure you like and subscribe to Untold Chronicles. Share this one with your friends.
Spread the word.
All right, so you've probably heard of the killing fields. You know the basic facts. Khmer Rouge, reign of terror, 75 to 79.
Right.
But the scale of this is something that I think is hard to really wrap your head around. Nearly a quarter of the Cambodian population died during this period.
It's a statistic that's just,
Literally.
it's really hard to grasp. It's just, how could this happen? How could a group like the Khmer Rouge, initially a communist guerrilla movement, how did they rise to power and inflict this kind of horror?
Yeah, and it's not like they came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
What were the conditions that were in place that allowed them to kind of take root and then ultimately seize control?
Well, Cambodia in the decades leading up to 1975 it was really unstable. You had the legacy of French colonialism, you had the spillover of the Vietnam War, a society that was really deeply divided, and then the Lon Nol coup in 1970 just really threw everything into chaos.
So Cambodia was really primed for a group like the Khmer Rouge to exploit that instability, offer a seemingly simple solution to a very complex situation.
Exactly. They positioned themselves as the saviors of the nation. They promised to restore order, create this pure agrarian utopia, cleanse Cambodia of corruption and foreign influence. And these promises resonated with a population that was just desperate for peace and stability.
But we know that those promises were a facade,
Right.
a mask hiding a much more horrific agenda.
Absolutely. Once the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh in April 1975, the mask came off, and the man behind it, Pol Pot, revealed his true vision for Cambodia.
Pol Pot. He's often compared to figures like Hitler and Stalin. But what was it about his ideology, his particular brand of fanaticism, that led to the killing fields?
Well, he was deeply influenced by Maoist principles, but he took them to a terrifying extreme. He envisioned Cambodia as a completely agrarian society, purged of anything that he considered modern or impure.
Wow.
Cities were emptied, money was abolished, religion was banned. It was a radical and ultimately murderous social experiment.
So anyone who represented the old Cambodia
Yeah.
became an enemy of the state.
Exactly. Intellectuals, professionals, artists, anyone with an education or a connection to the previous government, even wearing glasses or speaking a foreign language could make you a target.
It's just horrifying how quickly the most basic markers of individuality became death sentences.
And it wasn't just about occupation either. Pol Pot's regime targeted specific ethnic groups, the Cham Muslims, the Vietnamese, the Chinese populations. They were seen as outsiders, threats to his vision of a racially pure Cambodia.
And this purge, this attempt to create a pure Cambodia, this led directly to what we know as the killing fields.
Yes, the mass grave sites across Cambodia, where the Khmer Rouge carried out their systematic executions.
And one of the most notorious of these sites is Choeung.
Right.
It's now a memorial, but the stories from that place are just chilling.
Choeung is a haunting reminder of the brutality inflicted upon the Cambodian people. It's estimated that over 17,000 men, women, and children were executed there. And what's particularly disturbing is the Khmer Rouge's methods.
They had this strange aversion to using bullets.
Yes, bullets were considered too expensive, too modern. So they often resorted to incredibly brutal and primitive methods. Victims were beaten to death with tools, bludgeoned with axes, sometimes even buried alive.
I've read accounts of children being smashed against trees.
It's almost too horrific to comprehend, but it's crucial that we confront these details no matter how difficult they are to hear, because it speaks to the depths of depravity that the Khmer Rouge regime reached.
And it wasn't just adults carrying out these acts.
Right.
There were stories of children, teenagers, being indoctrinated and forced to become executioners themselves.
That's one of the most tragic aspects of this entire period. The Khmer Rouge deliberately targeted children, brainwashing them, turning them into instruments of terror. This systematic destruction of innocence, of an entire generation, is perhaps the most lasting legacy of the regime.
It's hard to fathom the psychological impact on those children, both the victims and the perpetrators. It's a trauma that ripples through generations.
Absolutely. And we can't forget that the killing fields represent only one aspect of the Khmer Rouge's brutality. People were also dying from starvation, disease, and overwork in the labor camps.
It wasn't just executions. It was death by 1,000 cuts. A slow, agonizing death for so many. When we talk about the death toll, nearly 2 million people who perished, it's important to remember that it wasn't just about those who were directly executed.
Exactly. The Khmer Rouge created a system where death was omnipresent, where survival was a daily struggle. And this system was meticulously designed and ruthlessly enforced.
And one of the key instruments of this enforcement, this system of terror, was Tuol Sleng.
Yes, Tuol Sleng, or S-21 as it was known then, it was a former high school. But the Khmer Rouge transformed it into one of their most notorious prisons and interrogation centers.
From what I understand, Tuol Sleng was essentially a factory of torture and despair.
It was a place where the Khmer Rouge's obsession with control and documentation reached its peak. Thousands of people, suspected enemies of the state, were imprisoned there. They endured horrific torture, were forced to make false confessions, and ultimately, most met their end within those walls.
And it wasn't just about breaking people physically.
Right.
The Khmer Rouge were masters of psychological manipulation as well.
Yes, they were experts at creating an atmosphere of fear and paranoia. They used sleep deprivation, isolation, and constant threats to break down their victims, to force them to betray friends and family, to confess to crimes they didn't commit.
And all of this was meticulously documented.
Right.
Photographs, confessions, records of every interrogation.
Precisely. The Khmer Rouge were obsessed with documenting their own cruelty. It was as though they wanted to create an archive of their barbarity, a testament to their absolute power.
And today, Tuol Sleng stands as a genocide museum, a stark reminder of the regime's brutality and the resilience of those who endured it.
It's a sobering reminder of the depths of human cruelty, but it's also a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the most horrific experiences.
So we've talked about the rise of the Khmer Rouge, the horrors of the killing fields, the systematic torture at Tuol Sleng. But what about the outside world? Did the international community know what was happening in Cambodia?
The world was aware of the Khmer Rouge's takeover, but the full extent of the atrocities remained largely hidden from view during their reign. Remember, this was the height of the Cold War, and Cambodia was a pawn in a much larger geopolitical game.
So the focus was on containing communism, even if it meant turning a blind eye to genocide.
Sadly, yes. The Khmer Rouge's opposition to Vietnam, which was backed by the Soviet Union, made them strangely appealing to some Western powers. It was a classic case of realpolitik trumping human rights.
So in a sense, the world's silence, its inaction, allowed the Khmer Rouge to continue their reign of terror for as long as they did.
That's a difficult question to answer definitively, but there's no doubt that the Cold War context, the geopolitical calculations of the time, played a significant role in delaying a meaningful international response to the Cambodian genocide.
So the world knew, but chose to look away.
To a certain extent, yes. And this raises some important questions about the international community's responsibility to protect populations from genocide, even when it's politically inconvenient or clashes with national interests.
It's a sobering thought. And it makes you wonder how many other atrocities have been allowed to happen. Because the world was too preoccupied with political maneuvering, or simply didn't want to get involved. But the story of the killing fields isn't just about the horrors of the past. It's also about resilience, about rebuilding, about seeking justice. And those are topics we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
It's important to understand that the Khmer Rouge's ideology wasn't just about agrarianism. It was about completely rejecting anything they saw as modern or foreign. They wanted to erase Cambodia's history, culture, its very identity, and rebuild it in this twisted image they had.
So it was more than a political revolution. It was a cultural revolution, a social revolution, almost a religious revolution.
And it's zealotry.
Exactly. They demonized education, religion, even family ties. Anything that could foster independent thought or challenge their authority was just ruthlessly suppressed.
And in this transformation, this descent into madness, it happened so quickly. We're talking about a complete societal upheaval in just a few years. Yeah, it was breathtakingly swift and brutal from the moment they seized power in 1975. The Khmer Rouge implemented their agenda with terrifying efficiency.
So let's try to paint a picture of what life was actually like under the Khmer Rouge. We've talked about the killing fields and Tuol Sleng, but what about the millions who were forced into labor camps? What was their daily existence like?
Imagine being ripped from your home, separated from your family, forced to work in the fields from dawn till dusk. Food was scarce, often just a watery rice porridge. Disease was rampant. Medical care was non-existent. And you were constantly being watched, monitored, judged for any sign of dissent or weakness.
It sounds like an absolute nightmare.
It was. The psychological impact was immense. People lived in a constant state of fear and paranoia. They couldn't trust anyone, not even their own family members. The Khmer Rouge created a society where everyone was a potential enemy, where even a whisper of criticism could lead to imprisonment, torture, or death.
It's almost impossible to believe that this happened just a few decades ago, that such barbarity could exist in the modern world.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of the fragility of civilization, of how quickly humanity can descend into darkness.
And as we discussed earlier, the world largely turned a blind eye to this unfolding tragedy. The Cold War, political calculations, they all took precedence over human lives.
Yeah, the Cold War context certainly played a role. The West saw the Khmer Rouge as a bulwark against Vietnamese and Soviet influence in Southeast Asia, and so they were willing to overlook the regime's brutality, to provide tacit support, even as the evidence of genocide mounted.
So it wasn't just a case of ignorance. It was a deliberate decision to prioritize geopolitical interests over human rights.
It's a complex issue. Historians continue to debate the extent to which Western powers were aware of the full scale of the atrocities, but there's no doubt that the Cold War created a climate where realpolitik often trumped humanitarian concerns.
It's a chilling thought that the world's superpowers could be so callous, so indifferent to the suffering of an entire people.
It's a reminder that even in the modern world, with all our talk of human rights and international law, genocide can still happen. And it can happen with the complicity, or at least the silent acquiescence of those who have the power to stop it.
So what happened? How did the Khmer Rouge's reign of terror finally come to an end?
It ended, ironically, with an invasion. In December 1978, Vietnam, tired of border clashes and Khmer Rouge incursions, launched a full-scale invasion of Cambodia. Within weeks, they had toppled the Khmer Rouge regime and installed a new government in Phnom Penh.
But the Khmer Rouge didn't just disappear.
No, they retreated to the jungles along the Thai border and continued to fight a guerrilla war for many years. And their influence lingered in Cambodian politics, casting a long shadow over the country's efforts to rebuild and reconcile.
It sounds like a long and difficult road to recovery. How did Cambodia begin to grapple with the legacy of the killing fields? The trauma, the loss, the sense of betrayal.
It was a long and painful process. There were trials, truth commissions, efforts to document the atrocities and bring the perpetrators to justice. But the wounds ran deep, and they continue to affect Cambodian society to this day.
And what about the international community? How did the world respond in the aftermath of the Khmer Rouge's fall?
There was a mix of shame, guilt, and a desire to make amends. Aid poured into Cambodia, but there was also a sense of frustration at the slow pace of justice and the continuing instability in the country.
It sounds like a classic case of too little too late.
Perhaps, but it's important to acknowledge that Cambodia's recovery was ultimately driven by the resilience and determination of the Cambodian people themselves. They refused to be defined by their tragedy. They chose to rebuild their lives, their communities, their nation.
And part of that rebuilding process involved confronting the past,
Right?
acknowledging the horrors that occurred, and finding ways to memorialize the victims.
Absolutely. Memorials like Choeung and Tuol Sleng play a crucial role in this process. They serve as reminders of the fragility of peace, the importance of human rights, and the need for vigilance against tyranny.
They're not just places of mourning, but also spaces for education, for dialogue, for ensuring that future generations understand what happened and why it's so important to never forget.
Exactly. They're places where the past and the present intersect, where Cambodians can confront their history, honor the victims, and find hope for the future.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, the human spirit can endure, can heal, can find a way forward.
And it's a testament to the power of memory. By remembering the victims of the killing fields, we honor their lives and reaffirm our commitment to building a world where such atrocities are never again allowed to happen.
So we've talked about, the rise and fall of the Khmer Rouge, the horrors that they inflicted, and the world's kind of complex response to it. But what about like the individual stories, the everyday Cambodians who lived through this nightmare? How did they cope and how are they rebuilding their lives?
Well, it's important to remember that while we often talk about these events on a macro level, it's ultimately the individual stories, the personal experiences of millions of people, that truly captures the scale of this tragedy.
So what can you tell us about those individual journeys? The survivors, the families that were torn apart, the children that essentially lost their childhoods. How are they grappling with this legacy, both individually and as a nation?
While many survivors carried really deep emotional scars, the pain of losing loved ones, the memories of what they endured, it's a burden that they carry every single day. And for younger generations, those born after the Khmer Rouge, there's this inherited trauma, this sense of a stolen history, a lost innocence.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine how you even begin to heal from such a profound collective trauma.
It's a multifaceted process. Some people find solace in traditional forms of healing, like Buddhist practices. Others find strength in community, in sharing their stories and connecting with others who understand their pain. And for many, it's about finding ways to honor the memory of those who were lost, to ensure that their stories are never forgotten.
So it's not just about moving on, it's about remembering, about integrating this really dark chapter into the national narrative.
Exactly. And it's about rebuilding,
Mm.
not just physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. Cambodia has made remarkable progress in terms of economic development and political stability, but the psychological scars run very deep.
And part of that rebuilding process, I imagine, involves seeking justice, holding those responsible for the atrocities accountable.
Yes, the pursuit of justice has been a very long and complex process. There have been trials, most notably the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, which was established in 2006 to prosecute the senior leaders of the regime. But many perpetrators remain unpunished, and there's a sense of frustration among some survivors that true justice has not yet been achieved.
Yeah, it's a reminder that there's no easy solution, no quick fix for the wounds inflicted by genocide.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of ongoing dialogue, of truth-telling, of reconciliation efforts. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about acknowledging the past, understanding the root causes of violence, and working to prevent such horrors from happening again.
I read about a burgeoning art scene in Cambodia, with filmmakers, writers, and musicians using their art to explore the legacy of the Khmer Rouge. Um, it seems like art can be a powerful tool for healing, for processing trauma, for giving voice to the voiceless.
It absolutely can be. Art can be such a cathartic outlet, a way to express the inexpressible. It can help individuals and communities confront their pain, to find meaning in their suffering, and to imagine a better future. And it can also be a powerful tool for education, for raising awareness, for ensuring that the stories of the victims are not forgotten.
So even in the darkest of chapters, there's this glimmer of hope, this spark of creativity that shines through.
Yes, and it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The Cambodian people have endured unimaginable horrors, but they have not been broken. They are rebuilding their lives, their communities, their nation, and they're doing so with courage, with compassion, and with a determination to create a brighter future for themselves and for generations to come.
That's a really powerful reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, hope can endure. And that by remembering, by learning, by working together, we can strive to build a world where the horrors of the killing fields are never repeated. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Untold Chronicles YouTube channel and share this deep dive with your friends and family. Until next time, keep diving.